Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pennsylvania Professional Standards for School Nutrition Program Personnel webinar. This is Diane DeBolis, and I am the manager of the School Nutrition Programs at PDE, Division of Food and Nutrition. I will be presenting today's topic along with Kathleen Hiltwein and Jenny Edmondson, Public Health Nutrition Consultants here at the Division of Food and Nutrition. Today, we will introduce and review USDA's final rule on professional standards for school nutrition personnel, a key provision of the Healthy, Hunger-Free Kids Act of 2010. This final rule establishes minimum professional standards for school nutrition personnel who manage and operate the National School Lunch and School Breakfast programs. The final rule institutes hiring standards for the selection of new state and local school nutrition program directors and requires all personnel in the school nutrition programs to complete annual continuing education and training. We hope you find this webinar to be helpful in understanding the final rule. If you have any questions, our contact information will be available at the end of the presentation. And now I will turn the presentation over to Kathleen Hiltwein.
Thanks, Diane. During today's presentation, we'll review some background information on the final rule and provide important definitions provided in the regulations. Then we'll discuss the key requirements established in the final rule, including minimum hiring standards, annual training hours, and how to keep track of staff training, as well as state agency oversight. We'll also discuss some of the flexibilities provided, and then introduce several resources on professional standards. And then to conclude the presentation, we'll answer any questions you may have. So why do we have professional standards? So what is the intent? The provision of the Healthy, Hunger-Free Kids Act that call for the development of these standards is meant to ensure that key school nutrition professionals that manage and operate the National School Lunch Program and School Breakfast Program have adequate knowledge and training to perform these duties and responsibilities of their positions and meet program requirements. These regulations are expected to result in consistent national professional standards that strengthen the ability of school nutrition professionals and staff to perform their duties effectively and efficiently. So let's just go over some background information before we get into the nitty-gritty. The proposed rule was released back in January of 2014, and we received the final rule on March 2nd of this year. If you haven't done so already and you'd like to, you can go ahead and check out the final rule found at the link on this slide. Implementation begins July 1st, 2015, and will require all new school nutrition program directors to be hired based on minimum hiring standards. It will affect all employees that play a role in your school or school district's food service operation by requiring a specified minimum amount of completed annual training hours. The amounts required of each position is something we'll discuss later on in the presentation. So I'll now review the definitions of personnel within a school food authority. And just to clarify, School Food Authority, or SFA, is the governing body that has the legal authority to operate the school meal programs. So who is considered the director, the manager, and the school nutrition program staff? USDA's Food and Nutrition Services, or FNS, recognizes that there are varying structures within each school food authority. Therefore, the definitions for directors, managers, and staff are intended to be general and describe the function or role in broad terms to be applicable to most school food authorities. The final rule defines a school nutrition program director as the individual directly responsible for the management of the day-to-day operations of the school nutrition programs for all participating schools under the jurisdiction of the school food authority. It defines a school nutrition program manager as an individual directly responsible for the day-to-day operations of the school nutrition programs for a participating school, and school nutrition program staff as those individuals without managerial responsibilities who are involved in routine operations of the school nutrition programs for a participating school. Program staff may include, for example, those individuals who prepare and serve meals, who process transactions at the point of service, and who may review free or reduced price applications. These definitions apply whether or not an SFA is operated by a food service management company. If a new employee will work in more than one position, only the higher level position requirements would apply. And now we'll begin reviewing the key requirements of the final rule. Jenny will start by reviewing the hiring standards.
The final rule establishes hiring standards for the new state agency directors of the school nutrition programs and of the state distributing agency, which we will not detail in this presentation. The final rule also establishes hiring standards for new school nutrition programs directors. Again, the term school nutrition program, or SFA, directors refers to the local individuals directly responsible for the management of the day-to-day operations of the school nutrition programs for all participating schools under the jurisdiction of the SFA. It's important to note that the hiring standards for school nutrition program directors apply only to new hires. Current directors are grandfathered in and do not have to meet the new standards for SFA directors and can stay in their current positions. The final rule permits that state agencies may require that new acting SFA directors expected to serve for 30 days or more meet the hiring standards. Also, for schools and districts looking to hire a new director for school year 2015-16, the final rule does allow you to hire a candidate that meets the state and local employment requirements in place prior to July 1st, 2015, as long as the LEA advertised the vacancy prior to July 1st. The final rule establishes hiring standards based on 3 distinct LEA sizes. As the LEA size increases, a higher educational level for newly hired SFA directors is required to match the level of responsibility and complexity of the food service system. So we'll start with the hiring standards for the smallest size LEAs of 2,499 students or less. The new hiring requirements for this size LEA include a bachelor's degree with a specific major, or a bachelor's degree with any academic major and a state-recognized certificate, or an associate's degree with a specific major and at least 1 year of relevant experience, or a high school diploma or GED and 3 years of relevant experience. The specific majors noted in the final rule include food and nutrition, food service management, dietetics, family and consumer sciences, nutrition education, culinary arts, business, or a related field. A list of the specific majors are in the final rule, and they can also be found on pairs in download forms under the Professional Standards for School Nutrition Personnel section. The form number is PDE SNP 251. They are also found in a chart in the School Nutrition Association summary of the final rule and on USDA's website, and both of these links are listed on the resource slide later in this presentation. I also want to mention that the state-recognized certificate that's listed under the second bullet point does not apply to the state of Pennsylvania. We do not have one in PA, but USDA did include this in the final rule to recognize the handful of states that do have this kind of program. Because of concerns over the ability to hire SFA directors for very small LEAs with less than 500 students, the final rule allows the state agency discretion to approve an LEA's hiring of a school nutrition program director that has a high school diploma or GED, but less than 3 years of relevant program experience. The LEA interest in hiring an applicant with less than the 3 years of experience must demonstrate to the state agency that the applicant meets the minimum educational standard and therefore is otherwise qualified for the position and is the best available candidate. This hiring flexibility is expected to benefit residential child care institutions, or RCCIs, and other schools that may face unique challenges in finding experienced candidates, such as those in rural areas. The LEA size of 2,499 or fewer students is the only LEA size that permits a high school diploma or GED to meet the educational requirement. It's also the only LEA size permitting an associate's degree with 1 year of experience. So we'll move on to the next LEA size, which is LEAs that include 2,500 to 9,999 students. The hiring requirements for directors in this LEA size include a bachelor's degree with one of the specific majors I mentioned earlier, a bachelor's degree with any academic major and a state-recognized certificate. Again, we don't have that in our state. A bachelor's degree with any academic major and at least 2 years of relevant experience, or an associate's degree with one of the specific majors and at least 2 years of experience. So for this LEA size, an associate's degree with at least 2 years of experience is the minimum requirement for being hired as a director. Finally, the hiring standards for the largest size LEAs that include 10,000 or more students are a bachelor's degree with a specific major, a bachelor's degree with any academic major and a state-recognized certificate, or a bachelor's degree with any academic major and at least 5 years of experience in program management. Again, just to review, the specific majors noted in the final rule include food and nutrition, food service management, dietetics, family and consumer sciences, nutrition education, culinary arts, business, or a related field. So for this largest size LEA, the hiring requirements are that at the very least the candidate would need to have a bachelor's degree. Because food safety is critical for the school nutrition programs, the final rule requires food safety training for all new school nutrition program directors, regardless of LEA size category. New directors must have completed at least 8 hours of food safety training within 5 years prior to their starting date. For example, the ServSafe training or NSFMI's 8-hour food safety course. If they have not done so, new directors must complete the required training within 30 calendar days of their starting date. State agencies have the discretion to impose stricter standards and may require current school nutrition directors to obtain food safety certification as well. So we'll go through some frequently asked questions on the new hiring standards. Can grandfathered school nutrition personnel transfer to a similar size LEA? Yes, the final rule allows grandfathered directors to remain in their positions or to transfer to another position in an LEA of the same size category within the state or between states. The ability to transfer is intended to allow current employees an opportunity to enhance their program expertise by moving to another position for which they are qualified and determined to be the best candidate. The rule also gives current directors the flexibility to move to a position in a larger SFA within the same size LEA category. However, to move to a larger LEA size category, for example, to move from an LEA with 4,000 students, which is in the 2,500 to 9,999 category, to an LEA with 12,000 students, which is in the 10,000 or more size category, a grandfathered program director must meet the hiring standards established for the larger LEA size. As noted earlier, as the LEA size increases, the minimum educational level also increases to match the demands and complexity of the job. What if an individual is hired to perform more than one school nutrition job? In general, if an individual is hired to perform more than one school nutrition job, the hiring standards for the higher level position will apply. For example, if an individual will serve as both school nutrition program director and as program manager, this person would have to meet the hiring requirements for the program director position because of the duties required. What if a program director oversees more than one SFA? If a program director will oversee more than one SFA, the sum of the student enrollment determines the hiring requirements. In such a case, a new program director will have to meet the hiring requirements for the LEA size that reflects the total student enrollment. What if an individual serves in two completely different capacities, for example, a school principal who is also the school nutrition program director? If an individual will serve in two completely different capacities, such as school principal and school nutrition program director, the hiring standards for the appropriate LEA size will still apply and must be met. USDA does recognize that the final rule doesn't address every unique hiring situation, and so that you can work with our agency and we can work with USDA to address these unique situations as they arise. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn this back over to Kathleen, who's going to talk about the annual training requirements.
Okay. Annual job-specific training is the best way to ensure that school nutrition program personnel at all levels maintain and upgrade their skills to meet the needs of students and to effectively implement school nutrition program requirements. FNS understands that state agencies and SFAs typically hold trainings prior to the beginning of the school year. It's anticipated that most of the training hours for school nutrition program directors, managers, and staff will be completed at a time that minimizes work disruptions while school is in session. However, employees may also receive training at other times during the year and apply it to their annual training requirement. For example, during the school year, staff may receive training on the operation of new equipment, on new policies as they emerge, or when an administrative review identifies issues that need correction. I want to just take a moment to point out that the USDA has clarified that annual training requirements will be based on job responsibilities, not necessarily job title. So although someone may not consider themselves part of the school food authority and he or she may dedicate less than 20 hours a week to their food service related responsibilities throughout the school year, he or she is still required to complete training requirements pertaining to their school food service related job duties. The USDA identifies 4 key areas of training in the final rule: nutrition, operations, administration, and communications and marketing. Each of these key areas are broken down into key topics and learning topics and codes. On the next slide, we'll take a look at a smaller portion of what this list of key areas looks like. These topics and codes will be used to track your completed training. If you're wondering right about now how school food authorities will be tracking training, we'll discuss that later on. Each individual employee at the SFA level must receive and complete training on the topics or areas applicable to his or her job or as required by FNS. The Secretary of the USDA has the authority to require any other appropriate training topic to address critical issues. Therefore, the Secretary may require, as needed, that SFA employees complete training topics or courses identified by FNS to address crucial program needs. They do not anticipate that such action will be taking place annually, but may take such action in response to important program issues. If a specific training topic or course is required by FNS, it'll be available at low cost or no cost and in a variety of formats for convenience. This here is a snapshot of one of the 4 key areas indicated on the Learning Topics handouts used to identify and track annual training. The full list is available on USDA's Professional Standards website, on the Resources slide of this presentation, and in the Professional Standards for School Nutrition Personnel section and download forms on PAIRS. In this image, the key area would be considered nutrition, the key topic is menu planning, and the learning topic and code is USDA Nutrition Requirements, code number 1110, as you see indicated by the arrows. PDE will be adding professional standards learning codes and printable certificates to applicable trainings on PAIRS, PDE's website, Project PA, and SNT websites to make this even simpler for you. On this slide, you'll see the breakdown of training requirements for program directors, managers, staff, and part-time staff. In each colored block, you'll see what's required for school nutrition personnel staff during the first year of implementation, which is school year 2015-16, and then what's required each year after. School nutrition program directors, which is the blue box, are required to complete 12 hours of annual training. For school year 2015-16, they're required to complete just 8. For school nutrition program managers, which is your red box, they're required to complete 10 hours of annual training. and for school year 2015-16, just 6 hours. For school nutrition program staff, which is the yellow box, they're required to complete 6 hours of annual training. In school year 2015-16, they're required to complete just 4. And then for part-time school nutrition program staff who are working less than 20 hours a week on average throughout the school year, they're required to complete 4 hours of annual training in school year 2015-16 and beyond. Also required, but not really addressed directly on this slide, are those folks working full-time but spending less than 20 hours a week throughout the school year on their food service-related responsibilities. These individuals are required to complete 4 hours of annual training related to their food service-related responsibilities. Another added flexibility to facilitate implementation of the requirements is that the final rule phases in the training hour requirements, as I mentioned earlier. Again, for this upcoming school year, 2015-16, program directors must complete 8 hours of annual training, program managers 6 hours of training, and program staff just 4 hours of training. An SFA director or manager may count the training offered to his or her staff toward part of his or her own annual training requirement. This flexibility is allowed because program directors must keep learning in order to communicate and help implement new policies and procedures through the training offered to SFA personnel. Since the final rule was released, we've received numerous questions addressing residential child care institutions and food service management companies and how they are impacted by the new regulations. Requirements in the final rule apply to all school food authorities operating the NSLP and SBP, including RCCIs and those that are contracted with an FSMC. If a school has a contracted employee with the title of a food service manager, there may be some questions about who plays the role of food service director. The decision of who the director is would likely have to be looked at within the SFA. Because the final rule calls for the completion of professional standards based on job duties, not necessarily job titles, it would have to be determined who fulfills the responsibilities representative of a director and a manager. Referring back to those definitions we reviewed at the beginning of the presentation, we recall that the director is the individual directly responsible for the management of the day-to-day operations of the school nutrition programs for all participating schools under the jurisdiction of the SFA, while the manager is the individual directly responsible for the day-to-day operations of the programs for a participating school. Although that contracted employee is called the manager, he or she may be playing the role of both the director and the manager, in which case they would be required to complete the annual training requirements for the higher level position, which would be considered the director. We'll now go over some additional flexibilities noted in the regs. All employees hired January 1 or later during any school year are only required to complete at least half of the required training hours for their position. In addition, this final rule gives the state agencies discretion to decide if acting personnel, temporary workers, and volunteers must complete annual training. Although it may not be required in the final rule, we encourage acting personnel, temporary workers, and volunteers to complete training when feasible. FNS also strongly encourages health and safety training for all staff involved in food handling. Because some commenters indicated that the ability to participate in training activities annually is determined by a variety of factors and may vary from year to year, FNS also provided the state agency discretion to allow SFAs to meet training standards over a 2-year period instead of just 1. It's important to stress that while some carryover may be allowed by the state, school nutrition employees are expected to complete some training each school year as required by the final rule. Allowing SFA employees to carry over excess training hours to another school year is, of course, intended for operational flexibility and to facilitate compliance with the professional standards. For example, a program manager is required to complete 10 hours of annual training. So over a 2-year period, the manager may complete 9 hours of training through an annual conference and 11 hours of online training the following school year. FNS will provide more guidance on this flexibility, but it's important that the SFA retain documentation to show during an administrative review how the SFA employees have complied with the total required training hours over that 2-year period. The final rule also allows a variety of training formats, both online, which are your webinars and interactive online sessions, and in person, which could be your classroom training, in-service training, seminars, etc. Training from a variety of sources is acceptable, including the National Food Service Management Institute, or NFSMI. Trainings conducted in-house by state agencies, by FNS, Team Nutrition, the School Nutrition Association, professional associations and organizations, and reputable commercial vendors. FNS is working in partnership with the NFSMI to make free or low-cost training available in a variety of formats. More than 450 existing training resources in a variety of formats are already listed on USDA's Professional Standards website, which we'll introduce to you as one of those available resources at the end of the presentation. Any of these resources I just listed are considered appropriate to meet the requirements of the final rule. On USDA's Professional Standards site, school nutrition staff may find training that meets their learning needs by conducting advanced searches for specific topic areas, training formats, training lengths, learning objectives, and training locations. A very important flexibility that everyone should take note of is that for this school year, 2015-16, training received 3 months prior to July 1, which would mean April, May, and June, counts toward the first year's training requirements for all SFA personnel. In the memo PDE-DFN released on May 12th, titled Professional Standards for School Nutrition Programs, we listed the information important for you to document in completing any training over this 3-month period. This memo is available under the Professional Standards for School Nutrition Personnel section in Download Forms on pairs. It's Form PDE SNP 252. We'll also review the list of information recommended for documentation purposes at the end of the presentation. I just want to note that FNS is developing a certificate system to help SFAs recognize various levels of training achievement. This will not be a certification or a credentialing program, and we do expect details about the system to be provided separately by the USDA. Okay, annual continuing education and training is an allowable use of the nonprofit school food service account and of the state administrative expense funds. The training costs must be reasonable, allocable, and necessary in accordance with the federal regulations. However, the cost of college credits incurred by an individual to meet the hiring standards for the position of the SFA director is not an allowable expense. Meeting the hiring standards would be the sole responsibility of a job applicant. And now I'll turn it back over to Jenny so she can review record keeping and program oversight.
Thank you, Kathleen. SFAs are required to document compliance with the applicable professional standard requirements annually. This means that SFAs need to monitor and document an employee's continuing education and training progress periodically throughout the year to ensure that each employee is on track to meet the training requirements by the end of the school year. SFAs must also document that newly hired program directors meet the training and hiring requirements. Documentation must be sufficient to demonstrate during an administrative review that the program director meets the hiring and training standards and that each employee has completed the applicable training no later than the end of each school year. The School Food Authority Director is ultimately responsible for demonstrating during the administrative review that the SFA is in compliance with professional standards. In a few minutes, we will talk about Pennsylvania's web-based tracking tool that SFAs will use to track training and continuing education for all school nutrition staff employees. This tracking tool will allow your PDE reviewer during an administrative review to view the training hours and types of training completed by school nutrition staff prior to arriving on site. Each SFA will decide how to maintain the records to document training completion and compliance with the new hiring standards of new directors. Acceptable documentation to show compliance with the professional standards would include college transcripts or degrees for new hires, food safety certifications, training certificates, attendance sign-in sheets, and training agendas. Professional standards records must be retained for a period of 3 years, which is consistent with other record-keeping requirements in the federal regulations. Monitoring an SFA's compliance with the professional standards will be addressed through an update from USDA to the Administrative Review Manual and related tools and forms for school year 2015-16. As part of the general areas of review, the state agency will examine records that document completion of applicable hiring and continuing education and training requirements, including review of the online professional standards tracking tool. USDA recognizes that school year 2015-16 may be a period of transition because establishing professional standards may involve significant changes for some SFAs. In the first year of implementation, PDE will focus on providing guidance and technical assistance to help SFAs move toward compliance. PDE will also assist SFAs experiencing challenges to help them solve unique issues that come up during implementation. Diane is now going to talk to you about Pennsylvania's web-based professional standards tracking tool.
Thank you, Jenny. So how are you expected to keep track of all this? Primero Edge, the web-based software system PDE provides to operators of school nutrition programs for use at no cost, has developed a professional standards tracking system called Teamwork, which Pennsylvania school nutrition sponsors will use for logging their professional standards training. Through July 31st, Primero Edge will be offering webinar trainings at designated dates and times on how to use and become familiar with this tool. You can visit the link on this slide to register for whatever date and time works best for you. After July 31st, a recorded version of the food service training will be available. Trainings completed prior to the Teamwork system being available are able to be logged into the Pennsylvania system, the Primero Edge Teamwork system, as soon as you set up your program for your schools. USDA has permitted certain flexibilities for the 2015-16 school year as schools and districts implement the professional standards. As mentioned earlier, school food authorities may hire a director that meets the employment requirements in place prior to July 1st, 2015, if the vacancy is advertised prior to July 1st. Training standards for school food authorities are phased in. The program director is required to have 8 hours of training, program managers are required to have 6 hours of training, and program staff are required to have 4 hours of training. Training received 3 months prior to July 1st, 2015 counts towards this first year's training requirements for all school food service personnel. In addition, for this school year, training standards are being phased in. Document all trainings completed between April 1st and June 30th, include employee name, employee position within the SFA, completion date of training, key area, key topic, and learning codes applicable to trainings, and the length of the training in hours. The reference memo sent on May 12th, which is PDE SNP 252, is available on PAIR's download forms and provides you with this information. Also on PAIR's download forms, under the Professional Standards section, you will find resources including the final rule, Professional Standards, which is a 2-page handout developed by USDA, and USDA questions and answers. The certificate for this Professional Standards webinar is available on PAIR's download forms under the Professional Standards section with the PowerPoint slides for this webinar. Again, remember, any questions that you may have pertaining to the professional standards can be directed to Jenny Edmondson or Kathleen Heltwine. We thank you for attending this webinar and hope you have found it helpful.